Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a stack of verses from the Great Koran, specifically excerpts from chapter 8, which is titled The Spoils.
Yeah, this material, it offers a really compelling look at some major themes woven throughout these particular verses. You've got conflict, faith, obedience, and also the consequences, as described here, for disbelief.
It really gives us a window, doesn't it, into the perspective presented here on, times of struggle, but also victory.
Exactly.
So our mission in this deep dive is to try and pull out the core messages, the key insights,
Yeah.
kind of the nuggets of knowledge, right? And understand what these specific verses are trying to convey about the people involved, the believers, the disbelievers, and how the divine is depicted, how it interacts with these situations.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Right at the very beginning, verses 8.11 offer, the text jumps straight in with a question the community was apparently asking. They ask you about the spoils. It's very practical, very immediate.
It is. And the response is equally direct. It immediately clarifies, where those spoils, those gains belong. It states, the spoils are for God and the messenger.
Ah, okay, so that kind of sets the tone right away,
Mhm.
establishes that the ultimate claim, the authority over these things, doesn't really rest with the individuals who were involved in the fighting.
Precisely. And that foundational idea is then immediately followed by an instruction, a directive aimed at those who consider themselves believers. Reverence God and reform the ego between yourselves.
That's fascinating because it connects the outward action or maybe the result of the action, like the spoils, to your inner state and how you relate to others in the community.
Exactly. Reforming the ego between yourselves, that really suggests dealing with internal conflict, maybe grudges, disputes within the group itself. It's about harmony, maybe humility.
And right alongside that is the command to obey God and his messenger if you are believers. So obedience and that internal interpersonal harmony, they're presented almost as conditions or maybe proofs of real belief.
Which makes the verses that follow, 8.2 to 4, really quite significant.
Hmm.
Because they don't just assume everyone who says they believe is, a believer in the full sense. They actually describe the characteristics of those who are called the true believers.
Right, it's like a definition through actions and feelings.
Yeah.
It lists them out. Those whose hearts are fearful when God is mentioned. That's a specific response, like awe or reverence.
Yes, and their faith isn't static either. It says their faith increases when his verses are recited. So the divine word itself has this transformative effect on them.
Okay.
They also rely on their Lord, which speaks to a really deep trust, a dependence.
And it's not just internal stuff, right? Their belief is shown in external actions, too. They establish the litany, which means being constant in prayer, and they disburse from what God has provided them. Generosity seems key.
Yeah, putting faith into practice. Consistent devotion, active charity. And the verses explicitly state these are the true believers. It's quite a high bar, defined by these core traits.
And the payoff for embodying these traits, according to the text, seems significant. The rewards mentioned are degrees at their Lord, forgiveness, and generous sustenance. So that inner state and outward action are directly linked to, divine favor and provision.
Now, these verses, they don't just talk about ideals, they also get into real-world challenges.
Right.
Verses 8.5 and 6 describe a really difficult moment right at the start of the conflict, it seems.
Right. It says the messenger had brought the believers out with the truth, but a group among them was deeply averse, reluctant.
Exactly. It paints this picture of resistance or maybe just strong hesitation within the believing group itself. Even when the path was supposedly clear, the text says they were arguing about the truth after it became clear, as if driven to death while looking. That's a pretty vivid image of fear, isn't it? Maybe facing huge odds.
Yeah, very vivid. And in this moment of uncertainty, verses 8.7 and 8 bring up a promise, but also a contrast in what people wanted. God had promised the believers one of two factions would be theirs. But the text mentions the believers wished for the one without might. They apparently wanted the easier option, the less dangerous outcome.
That sounds very human, preferring the path of least resistance. But the divine intention, as stated right there in the verses, was different. It was grander. God intended to enforce the truth with his words and sever the root of the disbelievers, and also abolishing falsehood, even if criminals disliked it.
So it frames a conflict not just as a small skirmish, but as something fundamental. A confrontation aimed at establishing truth and, well, getting rid of falsehood itself.
Exactly. So despite that internal hesitation and the daunting situation, the believers, they turned to prayer. It says they sought help from their Lord.
And verse 9 says, he responded, promising reinforcement. 1,000 angels, in fact, in succession.
Direct supernatural support is how it's presented. But what's fascinating is verse 10 immediately clarifies the purpose behind this aid. It wasn't just about, brute force.
Aye.
God rendered it only as good news to reassure hearts. And then, crucially, victory is only from God, who is almighty and wise.
So the aid's main function was psychological and spiritual, to firm up their resolve.
Seems like it. While also reinforcing that the ultimate source of any victory is divine, not just human effort or numbers.
And the details of this divine support in verse 11 are quite specific too. It mentions God covering them with safe drowsiness, like a security or peace amid the tension.
Mm-hmm. And sending down water from the sky to purify them, and removing the devil's filthiness. It's addressing multiple levels, isn't it?
Yeah, physical, psychological, spiritual needs. Purification, rest, overcoming negative influences.
And the result? It helped unite their hearts and reinforce their foothold thereby. So it solidified their internal cohesion and their external stability. It's a very holistic kind of support described here.
Building on that sense of divine backing, the verses then move into specific instructions for the engagement itself.
Yeah.
And clear consequences laid out for disbelievers. Verse 12 describes God inspiring the angels. I am with you, so reinforce those who have believed.
And then come these very direct, almost clinical instructions aimed at the disbelievers. God says, I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve, and then gives the command, strike above their necks and strike every fingertip.
Wow. That description of targeting, it sounds aimed at total incapacitation or maybe removal from the fight.
It does. And verses 13 and 14 give the explicit why for these severe consequences. That is because they were opposing God and his messenger. The text makes a very direct link between that opposition and a severe divine penalty. It states, whosoever opposes God and his messenger, then indeed God is severe in penalty.
And the immediate outcome for them in this context is starkly put. That, so taste it, and that for the disbelievers is the punishment of the fire. It connects the worldly consequence right to their ultimate fate.
The perspective then shifts back to the believer's conduct during the confrontation. Verses 15 and 16 have a clear command. O you who have believed, whenever you encounter those who disbelieve advancing, do not turn your backs. Basically, stand firm.
Stand your ground. But there's an exception.
Right. Yes. Verse 16 provides a key exception. It's okay to move back, unless as a strategy to fight or to take sides with a party. So it's not a totally rigid never retreat rule. It allows for tactical movement or joining another group. It distinguishes strategic action from just fearful flight.
Okay, that makes sense. But the penalty for turning back without that valid exception?
Severe. He has brought in a wrath from God, his refuge is hell, and wretched is the destiny. Unauthorized retreat carries a heavy consequence.
Now, here's a point that really shifts the perspective, I think. Verse 17 states to the believers, you did not kill them, but God killed them. And you nose did not fling when you flung, but God flung.
Right. Even in the middle of human action, the ultimate agency, the real power behind the outcome, is attributed to the divine. It suggests the human effort is more like a channel or an instrument for a larger, divinely willed event.
So your actions were real, but the power, the effect, that was God's. And verse 17 gives the reason for this divine involvement too, so that he might test the believers with a good trial.
The entire event, even the victory itself, is framed as a positive test. And the verse wraps up by reaffirming God's complete awareness. Indeed, God is hearing and omniscient.
And finally, verse 18 adds another layer, a consequence for the disbelievers' planning. Moreover, God will degenerate the stratagem scheme of the disbelievers. Basically, their best-laid plans are ultimately frustrated by divine will.
Moving on, the verses include these direct addresses and observations about the disbelievers, plus more guidance for the believers. Verse 19 speaks straight to the disbelievers after the confrontation. If you sought for victory, conquest has come to you.
That sounds almost ironic, acknowledging their desire for a decisive outcome, which happened just not in their favor.
Exactly, and it offers them a path forward. If you refrain, it will be better for you. A chance to stop the hostility is presented.
But the consequence, if they continue?
Clear. If you return, we shall return, and your party will never avail you at all, even if you were many, because God is with the believers. Numbers. Strength irrelevant against divine support for the believers, according to this.
Okay? Then the focus swings back to the believers again. More instructions in verses 20 and 21. Obey God and his messenger and do not turn away from him while you hear. It emphasizes active listening, adherence, not just passive hearing.
Yeah, and a cautionary example follows. Do not be like those who say, we have heard, while they did not hear. It's drawing a line between just saying you hear and truly understanding, internalizing the message.
Verses 22 and 23 then describe those who fail to truly hear or reason, calling them the worst of creatures before God, the deaf and dumb who do not reason.
And this isn't necessarily about physical deafness or muteness, is it? It seems more about a spiritual or intellectual inability, maybe unwillingness to grasp the truth. Verse 23 makes a strong statement. Even if God had made them hear, they would have turned away, suggesting a kind of willful, ingrained rejection.
Then verse 24 gives a really vital instruction to believers about responding to the divine message. Respond to God and the messenger when he invites you to what gives you life. The message itself is described as life-giving.
And this is followed by a very profound statement, I think, about God's influence. Know that God switches between a man and his heart, and to him you will be assembled.
How is that usually understood?
Often it's taken to mean God has ultimate power over one's inner state, your intentions, maybe your spiritual receptivity. It's a reminder of God's deep knowledge of your innermost being, and also that ultimate accountability before God.
Okay. And verse 25 offers a significant warning. Beware of a trial that does not befall those who transgress exclusively.
That's interesting. It suggests that trials or consequences aren't always just limited to the overtly guilty ones. They can have a broader impact, maybe testing the whole community.
And it reinforces that earlier theme. Know that God is severe in penalty. The potential for severe consequence is always there, it seems, for various kinds of deviation or opposition.
Then verse 26 provides a historical reminder for the believers, recalling their past vulnerability. Remember when you were few, oppressed, fearing the people would grab you.
Right, recalling a time of weakness.
And contrasting it sharply with divine deliverance. God gave asylum, supported with his victory, and provided good things so that you might be thankful. It's a powerful reminder of their dependence on divine support and the obligation for gratitude that comes with it.
There's a strong warning in verse 27 against internal failure, specifically betrayal. O you who believe, do not betray God and the messenger as you betray your loyalties while you know.
Wow. So it equates breaking trust within the community, especially knowingly, with a fundamental betrayal of God and the messenger. That's heavy.
It is. And verse 28 touches on worldly attachments, identifying them as tests. Know that your wealth and your children are only a trial.
And that with God is a great reward. So they're not inherently bad, but they are presented as tests that could distract you from the divine relationship. The focus should be on the greater reward with God.
For those who navigate these trials properly, with reverence, verse 29 describes a profound reward. If you reverence God, he will grant you criterion, atone your bad deeds for you, and forgive you.
Criterion, yeah. That usually implies discernment, like a light or an ability to distinguish right from wrong, truth from falsehood. It's presented as a key benefit of reverence, leading to spiritual clarity, forgiveness, wiping away errors. And it ends, for God possesses great favor.
The verses then turn back again to the disbelievers' actions, specifically recalling their schemes in verse 30. When those who disbelieved schemed against you to apprehend, kill, or expel, their plotting is explicitly mentioned.
But the verse immediately introduces the divine counteraction. They schemed, and God is the best of schemers. It asserts that God's plan and knowledge essentially encompass and ultimately supersede human plotting, no matter how malicious.
Verses 31 and 32 capture the disbelievers' dismissive attitude towards the divine message. When the verses are recited, they apparently say, we have heard, if we wanted, we could say, like, these are only tales of the past.
A clear claim they could replicate it, and just dismissing it as old stories. And their challenge escalates in verse 32 with that direct appeal. "O God, if this is the truth from you, then shower upon us stones from the sky or bring us a painful punishment." They're demanding immediate, undeniable physical proof or retribution.
But verse 33 provides the reason why that immediate, overwhelming punishment didn't happen right then. It states, God was not to punish them while you are among them, and God was not to punish them while they are seeking forgiveness.
So the presence of the messenger and the possibility of repentance are presented as factors that delayed or prevented that specific immediate punishment they were asking for.
Then verses 34 and 35 give the reasons why, according to the text, the disbelievers do deserve punishment and are considered unworthy. A key point is They're repelling from the sacred mosque, and they were not its guardians.
Its guardians are only those who are pious, so it highlights their actions against a central sacred place and their perceived lack of piety, which disqualifies them as its custodians.
And their form of devotion there is described dismissively compared to the believer's litany. Their litany prayer at the house was only singing and clapping. It's presented as superficial or improper reverence.
And based on all this, verse 35 concludes their deserved fate. So taste the punishment for what you have been disbelieving, linking their disbelief and actions directly to the consequence.
Okay, moving into the final section of these verses we're looking at today, we see the consequences of the disbeliever's ongoing efforts laid out pretty clearly. Verse 36 states, "Those who disbelieve spend their wealth to repel from the way of God." They're investing heavily, using their resources to oppose the divine path.
And the outcome of that investment, described as ultimately fruitless, even painful. They will spend it, thence it will be a heartbreak for them, and then they will be defeated. Their efforts and resources used against the divine way lead to regret and ultimate failure.
And their final destination is stated plainly. Those who disbelieved will be assembled to hell.
Verse 37 explains the process and purpose of that assembly, so that God will distinguish the bad from the good, place the bad ones on top of each other, amass them, and put them into hell. Those are the losers. It's presented as a final separation and consequence for those identified as bad.
Yet even with these severe consequences described, verse 38 still offers the disbelievers a condition for reprieve, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Tell those who have disbelieved, if they refrain, what they have done previously will be forgiven for them.
Yeah, there's an opening. Past opposition can be pardoned if they stop, but if that hostility and disbelief continue, if they repeat, then the tradition of the predecessors has continued.
Referencing the pattern of punishment for past communities who rejected messengers.
Exactly. Who oppose divine commands as a historical warning.
Believers are then given instructions regarding continued conflict in verse 39. Fight them until there is no riot, and the entire religion should be for God.
The objective stated there is ending religious persecution or oppression, the word used is often translated as riot or sedition, and establishing the religion purely for God, not for human power or control.
And the condition for ending the conflict with the disbelievers is repeated. If they desist, then indeed God is cognizant of what they do. Stopping the hostility is the path to peace presented here.
If, however, the disbelievers reject this path and turn away, verse 40 reassures the believers. Know that God is your guardian, Hester Master, a wonderful guardian and a wonderful helper, reinforcing that divine protection and support for those who remain steadfast.
Verse 41 then addresses the practical matter, again, of wealth gained from conflict, the spoils detailing its distribution. 1/5 is for God, the messenger, the relatives, the orphans, the poor people, and the wayfarer.
Right, allocated to specific categories, emphasizing community welfare and the divine claim. The remaining 4/5, presumably, would go to those who acquired the spoils in the conflict.
And this distribution is linked explicitly to faith. If you believe in God and what was revealed to our servant on the day of the criterion. Belief is presented as a prerequisite for being entitled to spoils distributed this way.
And that day of the criterion is identified as the day the two assemblies met, suggesting a specific, significant historical event where truth was decisively distinguished from falsehood. The verse ends by stating God's unlimited capability.
Verses 42 through 44 then paint a really vivid picture of the scene and circumstances of that encounter, that day of the criterion. When you were at the lowest side of the shore and they were at the farthest side, it sets a specific tactical scene.
And it highlights how unlikely the encounter was without divine will. Had they made an appointment, they would have disputed, suggesting it wasn't a planned battle, but something orchestrated.
Why? Verse 42 explains God's purpose. God issued a command which was effective so that those annihilated alive would be by evidence. The outcome itself was meant to serve as clear proof, a sign.
There's also that mention of God influencing perceptions before the battle. God showing the disbelievers as few in a dream, and showing them as few in the believer's eyes, while lessening the believers in the enemy's eyes.
All so that God's effective command could be issued. It all points back to divine control over the whole situation, as verse 44 concludes. All matters are returned to God.
Then, returning to the believer's conduct in battle, verses 45 and 46 repeat some crucial instructions. Be firm and commemorate God frequently that you may succeed. Inner steadfastness and constant remembrance of God presented as keys to success.
And alongside that, unity and patience. Obey God and his messenger, and do not dispute with each other, Then you would fail and your spirit would depart. So be patient.
Right. Disunity leads to failure. Patience is linked directly to divine presence and support. Indeed, God is with those who are patient.
Verse 47 provides a contrast, warning believers not to be like those who came out of their homes insolently and to be seen by people while repelling from the way of God.
Yeah, distinguishing fighting with the wrong intentions, arrogance, seeking human praise, actively opposing God's way from the motivations expected of believers, and reminding them God is conscious of what they do.
Verse 48 brings back that element of external negative influence, describing how the devil adorned their deeds to them, the disbelievers before the encounter, giving them false confidence. None can overcome you today, for indeed I am your neighbor, like a promise of support.
But it's immediately withdrawn when things get real. The verse says, when the two parties sought each other, the devil drew back on his heels and said, "Indeed, I am free from you. Indeed, I see what you do not see. Indeed, I fear God."
So the devil abandons those he misled when faced with the reality of divine power, highlighting his own fear of divine penalty. The verse reiterates, God is severe in penalty.
Verse 49 mentions another group, the hypocrites and those with disease in their hearts. Seeing the believers' reliance on divine support, they apparently remarked, these people are deluded by their religion. They saw the believers' faith as foolishness leading to ruin.
But the text's counterpoint is immediate and strong. Whoever relies on God, indeed God is almighty and wise. True strength and wisdom, according to these verses, lie in relying on God, not in skeptical worldly calculations.
Verses 50 and 51 provide a really grim depiction of the disbeliever's end. If you could see when the angels caused the death of those who disbelieved, slapping their faces and their backs, saying, "Pace the punishment of the fire."
And the reason given is explicit. That is, for what your hands have sent forth. Their fate is presented as a direct consequence of their own actions and choices. And the verse emphasizes that God is never unjust to the servants. The punishment is portrayed as just, as earned.
Verses 52 through 54 then broaden the perspective, drawing parallels with past peoples who faced divine consequences, specifically mentioning the habit of Pharaoh's people and those before them.
What was the common thread?
They disbelieved in the signs of God, so God seized them for their sins. It highlights this recurring pattern, disbelief leading to divine punishment. The verses reinforce God's power and severity in penalty.
And verse 53 offers a really key principle, connecting this pattern to human agency. God does not change a blessing. He has favored a people with until they change what is in themselves.
That's a crucial insight, isn't it? It links the continuation or the removal of divine favor and blessings directly to the internal state, the actions, the choices of the people themselves. It's a principle of sort of self-determination within the divine framework. And again, God is hearing and omniscient.
Verse 54 reinforces the historical parallel, stating Pharaoh's people and others denied the signs of their Lord, were annihilated for their sins, and Pharaoh's people drowned. The conclusion, all were transgressors. These past examples serve as powerful lessons about the consequences of disbelief and transgression.
Verses 55 and 56 then summarize the nature of those presented as the worst of creatures before God, those who have disbelieved, for they do not believe. Disbelief is the defining trait.
And this is closely linked to behavior, particularly regarding agreements. Verse 56 calls out, those with whom you have made an agreement, but they violate their agreement at all times and they do not reverence. Repeated, consistent betrayal of trust is presented as a trait of those lacking reverence.
So verses 57 and 58 provide instructions on dealing with those who repeatedly violate agreements. If apprehended in conflict, the instruction is to uproot them. For those who will come after them, perhaps they will be reminded. It suggests a severe action intended as a deterrent, a lesson for others.
And if betrayal from a group is feared, even before they've acted, the instruction is preventative. If you fear betrayal from a people, then throw back to them on equal terms.
Meaning, dissolve the agreement openly, clearly, rather than waiting to be caught by surprise. And the reason given. Indeed, God does not like the traitors, emphasizing clarity and fairness, even when anticipating treachery.
The final warning in verse 59 is directed squarely at those who disbelieve and oppose. And let not those who disbelieve think they have outdone.
Right. Despite their efforts or any temporary successes they might perceive, the verses conclude with this powerful assertion of divine power. Indeed, they cannot cause failure. They cannot ultimately thwart the divine plan or overcome God's will.
Wow. Okay, that was a deep exploration indeed. We went from the initial question about spoils, defining a true believer, all the way through the challenges, divine interventions, specific rules of engagement, and the stark consequences described for disbelief.
To these profound insights about internal states, historical lessons, the nature of divine power, and human responsibility, it's a lot packed into these verses.
It really is. We saw how the text defines belief not just by name, but by action and inner state. How external conflict is intertwined with spiritual reality, with divine orchestration.
And how there's a clear path described for both conflict and potential peace based on the other party's actions. That principle, the divine favor is tied to what's in themselves. That's a powerful takeaway. It resonates way beyond just the context of war, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We've touched on everything from wealth distribution and battlefield conduct to the schemes of disbelievers, the role of the devil, the lessons from past generations. It's a really comprehensive picture presented here.
So what does all of this mean for you, listening in? These verses lay out a framework for understanding things like loyalty, trust, the consequences of opposition, and the dynamic between human action and divine will, all within a specific context of conflict and community building.
Which brings us to an important question for you to consider as you reflect on all this. How might these descriptions of faith, obedience, internal change, and trust in the divine, especially as they're presented here in relation to struggle and opposition, how might they offer insights or maybe challenges when applied to situations and relationships in our own lives? Even those far removed from physical conflict. Something to mull over.